When I opened my eyes in the hospital, the machines beside me beeped like they were struggling to keep me alive. My throat burned from the breathing tube, my ribs screamed every time I inhaled. But I only had one question. Did my parents come? The nurse didn't answer. She just adjusted my IV and looked away. That silence? That was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I had been in a coma for 3 days after the crash. It was freezing that night, late January. The roads were slick and the streetlights were blurry through the frost. I had just finished installing a mural for a local youth shelter downtown. It was my last gig before rent came due again. I remember gripping the wheel tight, tired, hungry, and then nothing. Apparently, my car hit black ice. I spun out and slammed into a tree. When the paramedics pulled me out, my body was barely functioning. 2 broken ribs, a bruised lung, a mild spinal fracture. I coded once in the ambulance, 3 days in a coma. And in those 3 days, no one came. Not my father, Victor. Not my mother, Denise. Not even a call from my golden boy brother Trent, who lived only an hour away. I only learned what really happened after I woke up. The nurse, her name was Rosa, was the one who told me. She hesitated at first, like she didn't want to add more pain to someone already crushed under it. But I asked, gently, firmly. She told me that a neighbour, Mrs. Winifred, 75 years old, was the one who found me. She had seen my car crumpled at the edge of the park entrance and called 911. She stayed with me, her hand on my shoulder, until the medics arrived. She even came to the hospital twice while I was under, left a prayer card on the side table. She wasn't family. She owed me nothing. But she came. My parents? They actually did come. For 4 minutes. Rosa told me she saw it on the security feed. My mum and dad walked into the ICU lobby, talked to the billing desk. The clerk explained that I was uninsured and in critical care, and the costs could exceed $18,000 even in the first few days. They left, didn't ask to see me, didn't step into the room, didn't check if I was breathing, just left. That hit harder than the crash. Even when I was unconscious, even when machines were breathing for me, they saw me as a liability, a burden, something broken and expensive. And the worst part, it wasn't even out of character. I'd spent years pretending they were just not good at emotions, that maybe they loved me, just didn't know how to show it. But this moment stripped the lie clean. They didn't love me. They didn't care. And maybe deep down, they never really had. All the signs were there. Like when I was diagnosed with asthma at 10, and my father said, "This is going to ruin our vacation plans." Like when I got a partial scholarship to art school, and my mother scoffed, "You'd better marry someone rich or start painting dollar bills." Like how Trent crashed his second car, and my parents bought him a new one within the week. But when my studio needed just $3,000 to stay open, they said, "That's not a real job anyway." And now when I needed them most, I got 4 minutes of lobby time. That was the last straw. I lay in that sterile white bed, wrapped in wires, IVs, monitors, trying to breathe with half my lung working. And something inside me, maybe the little girl who still hoped they'd show up, finally died. What replaced it wasn't rage, it was clarity. Crystal clear silence, the kind that comes after you stop begging to be loved by people who only see you when they need something. So yeah, I watched a lot of revenge stories on YouTube that week. Between pain meds and breathing therapy, I binged everything from fictional plots to real-life karma tales. Not because I wanted to get back at anyone, but because they all had that moment, that one scene where the person who was cast aside stands tall, unshaken, untouched, unapologetic. And the people who left them, they finally see what they lost. I didn't know yet how I'd get there. I didn't know there was a will. I didn't know about the vineyard, or the millions, or the storm that was coming. All I knew was this. If I survived this hospital bed, I would never let those people, the ones who left me when I was fighting to stay alive, get one more piece of me. Not my forgiveness, not my money, not my silence. The thing about being abandoned in a hospital bed isn't just the pain of that moment. It's how it unlocks every other moment that came before. When I lay there, barely able to move, tubes in my arms and machines doing half the work for me, I didn't just think about my parents walking out that lobby. I thought about every quiet betrayal leading up to that day, and suddenly everything made sense. When I was 10, I had my first real asthma attack. The scary kind, blue lips, gasping for air, curled up on the floor of the living room. My mum, Denise, panicked and called 911. And I remember seeing the red lights bouncing off the walls. I also remember what she said later that night, when she thought I was asleep. "This is going to ruin our vacation fund." Not, "Thank God she's okay." Not, "What if we had lost her?" Just money. By the time I was 15, I knew how to read their silences, like when I brought home my first painting, a watercolour skyline I spent hours blending by hand. My dad barely looked up from his laptop. "You know artists starve, right?" he muttered. Trent, meanwhile, got a golf scholarship despite quitting half his matches. When he crashed his first car, they said he was under pressure. They leased him a second one the same month. When I got accepted into art school on a partial scholarship, they said, "You better find a man with health insurance." They didn't even come to my graduation. I remember looking out into the sea of faces from the stage, hopeful, proud, glowing students, and seeing rows of clapping families. Except my row was empty. There's this thing that happens when you're constantly made to feel like a burden. You start apologizing for existing. You stop expecting to be chosen. You convince yourself crumbs are meals. I used to tell myself I was just low maintenance, that I didn't need praise or gifts or even phone calls on my birthday. But the truth is, I didn't expect them, because I never got them. Even my move to the city was framed as a relief. "Good for you," my dad said. "Now we can finally use the guest room again." My brother, Trent, though, he got the whole buffet. Attention, support, excuses. I could never keep up. He dropped out of college to explore music. His studio lasted 6 weeks. My parents paid off the lease and called it a growth phase. Meanwhile, I was picking up 4 freelance gigs a week just to keep my inhaler refilled. And here's the wildest part. Despite everything, I still tried. I still sent them updates on my projects, still invited them to every gallery night, every mural unveiling. I once mailed my dad a framed photo of a public wall I painted for a veterans centre. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd feel proud. You know what he did? He called and asked, "Did you have to make it so political?" That was the last time I sent him anything. I want to pause for a second here, because I know some of you watching might relate to this too much. Maybe you were the extra child, the one who ruined someone's early retirement, the one who didn't quite fit the mould. If that's you, I see you. Actually, let me ask you something. Have you ever looked back at a childhood memory and realised it was way more messed up than you thought at the time? Let me know in the comments. I think some of us were trained so early to not make a fuss that we didn't even notice we were drowning. Anyway, back to the story. By the time I turned 25, I'd stopped hoping for anything. I paid my own way, kept my head down, and worked quietly. I was proud of what I built, not because it was big, but because it was mine. Then came the accident, and their silence. And suddenly it wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. I wasn't some dramatic daughter craving attention. I was a ghost they'd been slowly phasing out for years. The hospital visit was just the final erasure. They walked away from my broken body because it was the easiest thing to do. And if I hadn't survived, I don't think they would have shed a tear. In fact, I don't think they would have claimed me at all. I could imagine my mother telling people I moved away and lost touch. I could hear my father saying she made her choices. And Trent? He'd probably post a selfie and say, "R.I.P. sis, gone too soon," then go right back to brunch. But I didn't die. And that was about to be their biggest problem. The hospital discharged me on a Tuesday. It was raining. Fitting, I guess. They wheeled me to the exit with a tote bag of medication, a cane I didn't want to look at, and an envelope full of printed instructions I couldn't afford to follow. No family, no ride, no take care. Just the nurse who patted my shoulder and whispered, "You're tougher than you think, sweetheart." I stepped outside and immediately felt the weight of the world land back on my shoulders. The cab ride to my studio apartment felt longer than usual. Every pothole rattled my ribs. Every bump reminded me that healing was going to take longer than anyone cared to ask about. When I finally got home, and I use that word loosely, I collapsed on the futon. I hadn't even remembered that I'd prepaid rent 6 months in advance, back when I had a few extra commissions rolling in. That foresight probably saved my life. The next morning, I checked my bank account. 72 mem 53. That was it. No savings, no safety net, no fallback plan. The hospital bill would arrive within a week. I already knew the numbers from the breakdown the admin lady gave me before I left. Total due, 42,380 itemised ICU care, imaging, oxygen, surgery consults, prescription meds, follow-up therapy. None of it covered. All of it mine. And that was before rent, groceries, electricity, before life. I thought about calling my parents, just to say I was out, just to see if they'd say anything, even something neutral like good luck or let us know if you need help. But I didn't. I already knew what they'd say, or worse, what they wouldn't. So I turned off my phone and I sat in silence. That week I tried to paint again, just to feel normal. But I couldn't hold the brush long without my fingers cramping. My spine ached if I stood more than 20 minutes. The canvas stayed blank. It was like life had broken not just my body, but everything I used to anchor myself. There were days I didn't open the blinds, nights I ate crackers for dinner because it hurt too much to go downstairs, and mornings I stared at the ceiling and wondered how many other people have felt like this, like ghosts still pretending to be alive. One night, I pulled out my old phone and opened the photo library. I scrolled back through years of moments that were supposed to be milestones. My first studio rental, I'd painted the walls myself, no photo from my parents. My first big mural unveiling, the local news had covered it, not a single message from my mum. My 25th birthday. A few co-workers brought me cupcakes. My brother sent a meme that said, "Congrats, you're old now." That was it. I kept scrolling and scrolling, trying to find even one picture of the four of us together. There were none after I turned 11. I don't know why that hit me so hard. Maybe because I realised something brutal. They hadn't just forgotten me when I was in the hospital. They'd been slowly erasing me for years. Birthday by birthday, memory by memory. Until all that was left was someone they used to claim, until it cost them something. I wasn't their daughter. I was a chapter they skipped, a mistake they edited out. And still, I had survived. That realization came not with fireworks, but with something softer, a flicker, a warmth in my chest that said, "They left you, but you're still here." It didn't make me feel strong, not yet, but it made me feel possible, like maybe surviving could be a kind of rebellion. So I started small. I sorted through the hospital paperwork, making a spreadsheet of what I owed. I looked up local debt clinics, free therapy programs, temp gigs I could do sitting down. I even tried selling some old canvases online, though most got lowballed or ignored. But every small move felt like a brick laid on a broken foundation. Some days, all I could manage was brushing my hair. Other days, I answered emails or applied for art grants I knew I wouldn't get. And slowly, a shape began to form beneath the wreckage. Not a future, not yet, but the outline of one. I want to be honest with you, if you're still watching. There was a part of me that wanted revenge. Not the flashy, dramatic kind you see in movies. Just a moment. A moment where they'd look at me, really look, and realise what they lost. But at the time, I didn't know how to get there. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have power. All I had was breath, a cane, and a spreadsheet full of debt. But that would change, sooner than I ever imagined. It started with a voicemail I almost didn't check. I was lying on the futon, wrapped in the same throw blanket I'd used since college, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, expecting spam, but something in the transcript preview caught my eye. Representing the estate of Beatrice Hartley. Beatrice? It took me a second to place the name. She was my great-aunt. Technically, my father's aunt, the one who lived somewhere in Northern California. I'd met her exactly twice, once at a family reunion when I was maybe 9, and once again when I was 19, and she came to see one of my student exhibits. She brought me a lemon tart, said it was her favourite, and I looked like someone who needed sweetness that day. She didn't stay long, but I never forgot the look in her eyes, like she saw something in me no one else had bothered to look for. The next morning, I called the attorney back. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Ms. Lena Hartley, I'm calling to inform you that you've been named the primary beneficiary of Ms. Beatrice Hartley's estate. We'd like to schedule a time for you to review the details and accept formal documentation. I blinked. Primary what? That following Monday, I limped into a polished office building that smelled like mahogany and money. I was still using the cane, still bruised, but I wore the nicest thing I owned. A navy coat I found at a thrift store and had tailored when I thought I might one day have gallery openings. They handed me a folder, thick, heavy, full of tabs and legal terms that made my brain itch. Inside, I found everything I hadn't known I was missing. Beatrice had left me a working vineyard in Napa Valley, 3 rental properties in Eugene, Oregon, a diversified investment portfolio valued at over $3.2 million and 80% ownership in a quiet private lending firm called Brightstone Funding, and a beachfront condo with wraparound windows and Italian tile floors. My hands shook. But what broke me wasn't the dollar signs. It was the envelope tucked between the pages. Inside a letter, handwritten in looping script, faded at the edges like it had been read and maybe rewritten more than once. It began, "Lena, if you're reading this, that means you survived." I pressed the paper to my chest, and then I read on. "I know what it's like to be erased by the people who were supposed to raise you, to be made to feel like a problem they're stuck with. I left that same house when I was 19, after your father, my nephew, told me I was an embarrassment to the family name. I thought I'd never forgive them. I never did, really. But I built my own life. Quietly. Carefully. So that one day I could give it to someone who knew what it meant to be abandoned and still choose compassion. You are that someone. Use this not to prove them wrong. Use it to build something they could never imagine, something soft and fierce and utterly yours. Break the cycle. Let them watch you rise. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink on the letter blurred. My hands were trembling, but not from shock anymore, from recognition. Beatrice wasn't just leaving me an inheritance. She was leaving me a mirror, a road out of the ruins, paved by someone who had walked this pain before me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by my window watching the lights of the city flicker, holding that letter in my lap like it might vanish if I let go. I thought about everything I could do now, not just survive, not just pay off debt, but reclaim the story they tried to delete. I could build again, bigger, brighter, but this time without begging for permission, without hoping for applause. I made a list. It wasn't long, but it was clear. Pay off the hospital debt, in full, cancel the lease on my studio apartment, go to Napa, see the vineyard, touch the land Beatrice worked for, find out what Brightstone funding really was and why she'd left me control. And somewhere at the bottom of that page, I wrote one more thing: turn pain into shelter. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but I could feel it rising, the way storms do, quiet at first, then undeniable. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't post anything online. I didn't even answer Trent's texts. Not yet. I needed time to breathe again, time to remember who I was before I spent so much energy proving I belonged to people who refused to claim me. Beatrice saw me. Not because I was useful, not because I earned it, but because I was enough, and for the first time in my life, I believed her. The first time I saw my parents again was because of a real estate listing. I had quietly put Aunt Beatrice's beachfront condo on the market. No press, no announcement, just a discreet upload to a private MLS. But the address must have triggered something because a week later my doorbell rang. When I opened it, there they were, Victor and Denise Hartley. Looking like they had walked out of a country club catalogue. My father wore boat shoes. My mother carried a purse that probably cost more than my old hospital bill. Their eyes flicked past me into the marble-tiled hallway behind me. My dad's mouth opened first. "Whose place is this?" I smiled politely. "Can I help you?" They played nice at first. Too nice. "Oh, honey, you look great. We've been meaning to call. You must be so busy. But that dress, is it designer?" I offered them tea, served in the china set I'd had shipped from France. They drank carefully, eyes scanning every inch of the room. My mother lingered on the custom art hanging in the hallway, one of my own early works, now reframed in walnut and glass. Finally, my father leaned forward, voice low, calculated. "So, we heard about Beatrice. Sad. She always liked you. We figured since we're the next of kin after you, maybe you could transfer our share." I nearly laughed. No apology, no remorse, not even a question about how I'd recovered. Just hands, reaching again. I stood, walked slowly to the fireplace and pulled out a folder I'd placed there earlier. A copy of the will, highlighted, stamped. I handed it to my mother. She left everything to me. No splits, no debates, no crumbs. My father stiffened. My mother blinked. "Well, surely she meant for family to share. We're your parents, Lena. We raised you." That was the final crack. "You left me," I said quietly. "At the hospital. You stood in the ICU lobby for 4 minutes and walked away when they mentioned the cost. Silence. You didn't ask if I made it. You didn't call, but now you want to share? My dad's voice rose. We gave you life. We put food on your table. You owe us. I tilted my head, calm, unshaken. You took my name, I said, to open a loan 3 years ago. A $285,000 refinance using my credit, forged signature and all. They froze. Brightstone owns that debt now, I added. Guess who controls Brightstone? My father stood, furious. You can't do this. I stepped closer. I already did. My mother's voice cracked. This isn't like you. You were always the quiet one. No, I said. I was the invisible one. You just never looked long enough to see me. She reached for my hand. I pulled back. It's too late to love me now, not because I hate you, but because I finally stopped hating myself. They left, with nothing but bruised pride, and the realization that their daughter, the one they'd erased, had rewritten her own story. The next day, I drafted one final set of papers. The beach condo, sold, the profit, used to establish a fund for girls aging out of foster care, because no one deserves to be discarded and left to survive alone. Not like I was, not like Aunt Beatrice was. 3 weeks after my parents stormed out of the condo, I stood on the sidewalk outside their old house. Well, my house now. They didn't know that 5 years ago they'd signed a refinance deal with a lender they thought was some faceless bank. Turns out that lender was Brightstone. Turns out Aunt Beatrice owned Brightstone, and now I did. They'd defaulted months ago. No one told them. Because no one had to. A moving truck idled at the curb. My dad was red-faced, shouting at the driver like he could reverse the whole eviction by yelling louder. My mum sat on the porch steps, dabbing her eyes with a tissue in perfect performance. And then I pulled up, in a charcoal grey electric SUV, tailored suit, low bun, calm face. I stepped out, envelope in hand. This is your formal notice. The deed now belongs to a charitable trust in my name. My father's jaw dropped. What the hell is this? This house will be converted into a shelter for runaway girls, for kids like the one you left behind in a hospital bed. They froze. I turned toward the group gathered at the edge of the lawn. A social worker stood beside 6 teenage girls. One held a baby, another had a black eye. All of them had the same look I once did, trying not to hope, trying not to believe they were worth saving. My mom's voice cracked. You're doing this out of spite. No, I said. I'm doing this out of survival. You raised me in a house where love had strings attached, where silence was rewarded and independence was punished. You left me behind. Now this house will do the opposite. My dad stepped forward, fists clenched. We have nowhere to go. I looked him in the eye. You once told me I was dead weight, a leech, that without a real job I'd be nothing. Well, I got a job. I built a business. I inherited an empire. I rose. I paused. You don't get to climb with me now. They left that day with nothing but a suitcase and the echo of choices they made years ago. The same sidewalk where I once cried after being told to leave was now the beginning of someone else's safety. 2 weeks later, we held the grand opening for Evelyn House. There were flowers, donors, reporters, but most of all, there were girls who reminded me of myself. We filled the walls with colour. One hallway held framed letters, stories written by girls who'd been kicked out, silenced, discarded, Right before the ceremony began, someone handed me an envelope. A nurse from the ICU had recognized my name in the newspaper. Inside was a photo, me, unconscious, in the hospital bed, and beside me, her, Rosa, sitting, holding my hand. They left after 5 minutes, her note read, but I stayed all night. Just thought you should know you were never truly alone. I wept, not for the pain, but because after all these years I finally understood I wasn't forgotten. I was becoming. And now I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone walked away when you needed them most, and then tried to come back when they saw you rise? If you have, drop a comment. I want this story to be more than mine. Let's make space for all of us who survived being left behind.